Inshallah, we're going to begin this event entitled A Different Kind of High with a recitation of the Holy Quran by Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما ويسألونك ماذا ينفقون قل العفو كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات لعلكم تتفكرون. The next verses are from chapter 5. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء في الخمر والميسر ويصدكم عن ذكر الله وعن الصلاة فهل أنتم منتهون وأطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول واحذروا فإن توليتم فاعلموا أنما على رسولنا البلاغ المبين. صدق الله العظيم.
So real quickly, I just want to give a brief, before we bring up our speaker, I just want to give a brief introduction into what this event is supposed to be about. So yesterday was 420, and many of our classmates, many of my friends, many people smoke weed on 420, right? So people get high a lot on that day usually. So the idea was to talk about marijuana in a different way than it's been usually talked about. So from my experience growing up in the US, there's been like kind of two perspectives, right? There's been like the policeman that came to me in 6th grade that told me like drugs are bad. He gave me like a red ribbon, right? And he told me to say no to drugs. And then I listened to a Bob Marley song and it sounded pretty tight to smoke weed, right? So the idea of this event was, and for me, neither point was really convincing, right? Because just health effects alone, I don't think are a convincing enough argument. And when I started to learn more about Islam, I realized that for me, that was a much more compelling reason to make my decision, right? And so the idea was first to bring a speaker to share that perspective, to give some insight into an Islamic perspective on the issue, through mentioning some verses, through mentioning the example of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And after that introduction, to allow people to rebut any arguments that are made or to make different points. And sort of the overall goal would be to expand the discourse on the topic so they're not restricted to a simple dichotomy of like, you know, Bob Marley and D.A.R.E, right? So without further ado, I introduce all the way from Oakland, California, Amir Abdel Malik.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. My respected brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, we greet you in the greeting words of peace. Peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. I saw the flyer that y'all had yesterday, the MSU, with the weed on that bad boy. I can imagine some people thinking that the MSU or UCA done lost their mind. UCI done lost their minds. All that movement stuff, they didn't lost it. That was a good flyer, though. It was an excellent flyer. Because this issue has to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with from a certain angle. And so today, inshallah, we like to deal with this whole aspect of weed from a perspective coming from the Quran, from our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, as well as from those who are engaged in movement and struggle. The verses from the Quran that the brother read earlier are translated as follows. They ask you, O Muhammad, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, most merciful, they ask you, O Muhammad, concerning alcoholic drink and gambling. Say to them, in them is a great sin, and some benefit for men, but the sin of them is greater than their benefit. The other verse was, O you who believe, intoxicants and gambling are an abomination of Satan's handiwork. So avoid that in order that you may be successful. Satan only wants to excite enmity and hatred between you with intoxicants and gambling, and hinder you from the remembrance of Allah and from prayer. So will you not abstain? And obey Allah and obey the messenger, and beware. And if you turn away, then know that our messenger is only responsible for clear notification. Allah in the Quran doesn't just tell us to stay away from intoxicants. He tells us not to even go near them, intoxicants and gambling. Allah even recognizes in the Quran, as he says, that in some of it there are some benefit for men. However, the sins or that which is negative outweighs the benefits. And then Allah talks about how intoxicants can take you away from his remembrance, the remembrance of Allah. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was asked about intoxicants and as it relates to wine, but intoxicants in general, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that anything that befogs the mind, anything that befogs the mind, that causes a person to lose their senses in a way, that causes a person to lose their control of their faculties. And what greater faculty than there is than the mind? When we're not thinking about Allah, then we're not thinking about the things that derive from that. When you're thinking about the one God, you're thinking about becoming a better person. When you're thinking about the one God, you're thinking about being a good person. When you're thinking about the one God, you're thinking about doing things like standing up for justice, bringing reform to oneself and bringing reform to society. And so thinking about Allah benefits the human being, and it helps the human being become a better human being. And it helps the human being keep their moral compass. Because when a human being does not have their moral compass, when their moral